Yeah, really excited to speak and chat with y'all tonight, and thanks for having me.
Thank you so much. Yeah. So we're super excited to have these two brilliant people. And the real goal is to kind of let everybody get to know them, because I think when you read the bios, or even if you hear the introductions of both of these individuals, you might be a little bit intimidated, blown away. How did they get to these amazing roles? But actually, they have really cool stories. So I just want to kick things off by asking both of you, maybe starting with you, Matt. What was your first job? And did you think that you were going to end up doing what you do today as a data scientist at Spotify back then?
Uh, so flat out, the answer there is probably no. But yeah, so my first job was an internship in. So my first like real-ish job was an internship in undergrad, where I worked at a like a HVAC company. It's kind of like a project management intern, but it was interesting. I was like in the field and stuff, and not data related at all. But even before that, where I would say I probably learned most of my work ethic and job stuff was in high school. My sister and I actually ran a summer camp at our house. Or she was in high school, or I was in high school, and she was like finishing middle school and also in high school for a bit. And we had like a couple horses and like it's kind of a semi farm, so it was actually called farm camp. So uh, it was kind of just like it was like daycare, but like way more fun, I would say. But yeah, so we would just like hang out, like ride horses, and like be outside the whole time. So that was kind of the first, I guess, foray into the working world. We learned how to work, but it was super fun as well.
What about you, Anahita? Was it a similar path?
No, definitely not. Maybe I can talk to you a little bit about my career goal instead, because I went to college to pursue music, classical piano, Indian hand percussion. Thought I was going to be like the coolest first female tabla player from India who was like going to be really popular, and that did not pan out, of course. But I did find some interest in like music business in college, but I didn't know what data science was. I didn't know about data. I didn't know about any of that while I was kind of thinking about what was going to be my first job. But reflecting back to my first job, maybe it was just like babysitting or something in high school, which was not for me either. But yeah, I mean, I wanted to be a musician. I still play sometimes, but not professionally or anything.
Cool. I'm just reading through the chat, which is my favorite part of these things. And we have people coming at this from a few different perspectives, which I think is cool, but a lot of people who are either using data a little bit in their day-to-day roles, but want to kind of upskill it and really learn about the field. And then a bunch of people also interested in potentially pivoting careers. So this came at a good time for those folks. And I wanted to ask you, maybe back to you, Anahita. Obviously, in your work as a data scientist, you're working closely, for business stakeholders, and you're trying to make products more efficient. But there's also just like a lot of fun stuff you can do with data and interesting things. Do you have an example of just like a fun project that got you excited about data science in a new way?
Sure. So I work at Netflix. I love TV shows. But before working at Netflix, I was obsessed with Game of Thrones before the last season, of course. And I was just curious about this underlying scripts, kind of exploring gender imbalance in scripts and how that might have shifted throughout the seasons. I was just really obsessed with, exploring that and just doing some kind of linguistic analysis. So that's what I did for fun, for absolutely no reason. So I have a couple of passion projects that way. Also, I did a talk a couple of years ago on the emojis of Game of Thrones. So I think it was maybe the second to last season. What I did for fun, again, was analyze like what kind of emoji reactions people had with certain hashtags for certain episodes, and how those kind of hashtags, or emojis rather, were different from episode to episode, how people were reacting to certain characters or certain moments, certain scenes. You know what? I'll find a deck and I might link it in the chat if anyone's interested. But that's what I do in my spare time, and I have a lot of fun doing it.
Yeah, I think like one thing that we feel is really important when we're teaching people about data and getting interest. Yeah, people are interested, Anahita, no question. So definitely drop that in. Yeah. And I think like, and Leah, you can speak to this too, but we always tell young people that getting into data is a way to leverage the skill set to do things you already like to do and like use it in your own personal interests as well as in your career. I don't know if you want to add to that before we move into the sort of slide section.
Yeah, I totally agree. Data is a tool. It can be applied to just about anything that's interesting to you. And I think what makes an amazing data scientist, data engineer, data person are people who know how to apply data to problems they want to work on, things that get them excited. And if you're curious enough about solving a problem, you'll learn data skills just as part of your process. So if you kind of have that like problem first approach, the skills follow. And that's kind of a mindset that will serve you well in data roles as well.
Yeah, so with that, I think we can pass it over to Anahita and Matt to tell us about what does it mean to be a data person today. We want to kind of demystify some of the titles and some of the different roles because the field of data feels very vast, even though, as Leah mentioned, it actually just comes down to solving problems. And they're going to kind of break down what tools you would use in different roles and what do all those words mean, because there are so many entry points to this space. So I'll let you share.
Sure, 1 second. I'm just gonna drop this slide deck too in the my slide deck. I mean, like the Game of Thrones thing. I was just looking for it. Here it is.
Yeah,
it
we can't continue.
Thank you. Okay. So moving on to the presentation. Let's see. 1 second, everyone. Sorry.
I'm happy to share it actually.
Can
you
see
got it. Cool. Go for it.
All right. So what we wanted to start off with is really the various job titles out there. And this is really limited to what's out there. But you know, we're going to be talking about data scientist roles, data analyst, business intelligence kind of roles, data viz, and some newer roles too, like analytics engineer. I think that's something that's pretty hot and recent. Just to kind of show that there's a lot of overlap between these roles, as well as you know, some of these roles might be doing the same things, but are just called different things. We also have, you know, some surprising roles out there, and in fact, Matt found one in particular.
Yeah, when Anahita and I were looking for roles, I was trying to Google around and find the most ridiculous job title that had to do with data that I could, and I landed with a real job I found posted online. Granted, it is in Copenhagen, but the title was data magician, and I was kind of, I don't know, when I Googled it, I was like, there's no way anything comes up, but nevertheless, the internet did not disappoint. So yeah, the point here is just that, you know, companies out there are calling data roles kind of whatever they want. So it can be, you know, at times either intimidating or tough to manage or figure out, you know, what you would actually be, or what a role is actually responsible for and what you would be doing in it. So yeah, hopefully throughout this talk, we can help, you know, demystify and talk through some of at least what we've seen in our experience and what some of these roles and titles actually mean.
Yeah, definitely. And I'll just throw out there that I've seen a role or title called data whisperer in the past too. So there's some interesting ones out there for sure. So as I kind of mentioned, there are these different areas that we're going to be talking about. And what we want to do is just share a little bit about what this discipline might mean and what kinds of skill sets or tools they might be looking for in this realm. Starting off with data science. Data science is, I think, a pretty broad area, and I think it can mean something pretty different company to company. I'm sure there are differences between, you know, Spotify and Netflix in particular. I'm not a data scientist. I don't have that role at Netflix, but I do know that they're very different within teams at Netflix, but also from company to company. But on a broad level, it's analysis heavy, analytics heavy, whether that's predictive analytics or statistical analysis, but also some experimentation. And I'll give an example of that. I'm assuming that we have some folks who might have social media, maybe Instagram. I can give an example of Instagram, perhaps. Um, I recently noticed that my Instagram account looked a little bit different, or like my app looked a little different from my sister's, where my search button moved to the top. Hers was at the bottom, and I've seen that other things have just shifted around as well. Um, and what they're doing there is just testing for, you know, what might be a good product related decision to improve. I'm not sure. It could be retention, it could be any kind of some kind of value for the business. So whether that's just keeping people engaged on the app more. So that's kind of one of the potential things that a data scientist might do, and that's about experimentation or A/B testing. We won't go into too much detail. We won't bore you with that, but that's more of a practical example of what you might have seen, that, you know, your Facebook or Twitter or something might be slightly different from your friends, and that might be what's going on in the background, where they're just testing something or a product or feature to see if there's improvement in, you know, in a certain way the UI or design is organized within the product. Within data science field as well, I think there are a lot of different tools that you could be using. The first thing is SQL really is to get data out of a database. Usually at a lot of these companies, we're not looking at data in Excel files, or they're not stored in Excel files, right? They're in databases. So to get that data out, at the very least, you might need a little bit of SQL to kind of get that out there. And then some kind of analysis language, whether that's Python or R. But I'll also add that a lot of these roles have overlapping responsibilities from maybe the other three sections on the slide. So, for example, for me, I work in Tableau a lot, and we've kind of budgeted that into the business intelligence discipline. And that, what Tableau is, just it's a data visualization tool. So whether I want to create dashboards for our business, we might use a tool like that for a data scientist role as well. Since Matt has recently gotten into data engineering, I thought it'd be fun to kind of get his take on the data engineering side of things. Oops.
Sure. Thanks, Anahita. Yeah, as I mentioned a bit earlier, I recently transitioned into more of a data engineering role. So just to talk a little bit about what this bucket or discipline means. As Anahita mentioned, data scientists are often analyzing data. They need to answer a question like, does moving the Instagram search bar to the top improve the customer experience? But oftentimes, before you can even get to analysis like that, you have to, figure out how you're going to do it and where that data is coming from. So that usually kind of falls in this realm of data engineering. So what you can see here is data architecture / pipelines, big data processing, ETL. ETL stands for extract, transform, load. So that's really probably as simple as it sounds, just taking data from one place, maybe cleaning it up, slightly modifying it, and then putting it somewhere else. So that's the gist. I mentioned you can be preparing it or moving it around for another person, like another data scientist. Other times you could just be moving it between databases. It really depends on the application or the specific project you're working on. But yeah, that's generally what I've seen in my experience is moving data around like that. Some of the tools you might be using, you can kind of do it in a lot of programming languages, but Python and Scala are typically listed as some of the more popular options. You'll see SQL here again. Like Anahita mentioned, a lot of times the data we're working with tends to be on the bigger side. So interacting with databases and being able to query them is it's kind of like a common use case. You find yourself doing it quite a bit. There's a tool language called Spark. And then APIs. So if you're moving data around, APIs is kind of how you interact with different systems. So just being familiar with the general process of asking for and requesting data is a pretty common thing you'll be doing. Cool. So for our next section, we have business intelligence at the top right. I think Leah was going to speak a little bit to this. I think she has some background here she'd like to share.
Yeah, I'll jump in quickly. I sort of got my start in business intelligence and have built BI teams a bunch. So if anyone wants to chat after this about the world of BI, very happy to do that. But I would say the primary responsibility of a BI person or a BI team is to equip people in the business with the data they need to make decisions. So it sounds simple, but what you'll do is probably interact a lot with the data warehouse or the data infrastructure that your data engineer has set up. Then kind of interface between data engineering and the needs of the business to come up with the best ways of consuming information that hopefully kind of align with business processes and decision making. So it's a tricky job in some ways because you have to kind of live in both worlds. You're very much in the engineering world, but you're also in the business world. And, you know, when numbers are wrong, everyone's mad at you. And, you know, people always have data needs and you'll never be able to meet all of them. So I'm sharing too much about my career story, but what I will say about BI as like an entry point, if you are someone who's not on the data side right now, you're on the business side, and you build some data skills so you can query the database and you can start using tools, even just Excel and Google Sheets and Power BI, whatever, to start equipping your team with the data that it needs to make decisions, you'll be incredibly valuable right away. And it's kind of easy to pick up those things on the fly, especially if they'll help you in your day-to-day job. And BI can become a really, really exciting, viable career path if that's your entry point. That's my story. There are other ways in. And then to speak specifically about tools and skills, I think SQL is a must-have for just about anything in the data world. I'm a little bit biased there, but it's just so useful and so powerful and relatively easy to learn. So you'll be querying the database directly or the data warehouse using SQL and doing ad hoc analysis. And then you'll typically share the results of your analysis in a BI tool. So that's a tool like Tableau or Looker or Power BI, sometimes just Google Sheets, depending on what stage your company is in. But if you can get very comfortable in SQL and just learn one BI tool, those skills translate really well. So for those of you who jump into data stuff just because it's fun and interesting to you, but you're on the business side, BI is like a great entry point into the data space. But BI has its limitations and there are some more interesting ways to communicate data. So I will pass it back to the team to talk a little bit about data viz.
Gabby, maybe you can
Yeah,
tell.
I love talking about data visualization and I love hearing Leah talk about business intelligence. So it's a good segue. I think like one call out is some of the tools that are critical to BI really overlap with data visualization. I came into the field, my entry point was design. I was a graphic designer. I did a Master of Science degree at Parsons in data visualization specifically, though you absolutely do not need to do a master's degree to get into the field of data. One thing we all want to highlight. But yeah, the data visualization space is kind of one of the most ambiguous because in so many ways it's more of a skill set than a discipline of its own, which is like a strange thing to say coming from studying that discipline, but it's applicable across all the different fields, right? And there's highly design oriented roles on the data visualization side that are more like front end engineering. That's why we're seeing D3JS. It's a JavaScript language that actually Anahita and I studied together. That's how we met. And then there's even things like Sketch or Adobe Creative Suite. Those are tools that even graphic designers use for more static visualizations. And it's critical because everybody needs to access information in a visual way. That's the way we read and understand numbers, just as humans. But there's a lot of power in what Leah's sharing around BI. And I'll also use this as a moment to say, if you are somebody who has some BI skills, we're hiring BI analysts at the moment. So do reach out to us afterwards. But there's a lot of overlap. And I think it really just depends on what you are most interested in. If you like building things in front-end engineering languages, there's room for you in data visualization. If you like building static infographics that sit on websites or in marketing pieces, that's also a role. And then there's always the kind of more BI direction where you're building dashboards and visualizing that information that is being processed by data scientists and data engineers. And I'll pass it back.
Awesome. Thanks for that, everyone. Moving on to the specific titles grouped by these various disciplines that we kind of talked about. I wanted to give some more context on the data science field in particular, because I didn't really go into detail in some of these more advanced kind of roles, I call them. Machine learning engineer and research scientist, and maybe give you some examples of what those folks might be working on at Netflix, maybe at Spotify too. When I was at Spotify, I worked with some great research scientists and machine learning engineers who really worked on like that Discover Weekly algorithm or the daily mix playlists, or is that release radar playlist, fine tuning that kind of algorithm. Then at Netflix also there's that advanced kind of tier of personalization for, what kind of show you might be interested in based on your tastes. All very kind of, I think, things that we might be familiar with if we use these kind of apps. Yes, recommendation systems. But also the point of this slide is also to show you that there's overlap among disciplines, right? Like we see data analysts in this data science field. We see it pop up in business intelligence. We see this newer role, analytics engineer, which is pretty, we have a lot of roles like that in Netflix. And I think it's one at Spotify too, Matt. We see that show up for data engineering and data science. Maybe you can tell us a little bit more about that particular role, since I think it's kind of popping up a lot recently.
Yeah, for sure. So I have some good context here. I work a lot with some of the analytics engineers at Spotify. I think the first one, the role kind of started maybe a couple years ago. Yeah, how I've heard it described is analytics engineers are often, they kind of sit in between a data science role and a data engineering role. But their main task is really just to organize and clean and structure data so that it's ready for data scientists and other humans to consume. So they're making sure that all the columns are like, really clean and easy to use, easily comprehensible. And how I've heard that contrasted with data engineering is slightly more often data engineers could be moving data around for other machines to consume. So for instance, again, back to like pipelining between two services or systems might be a common task for data engineer. So you might be working more with the engineering and tech teams there. But what I've seen is that analytics engineers are often, leaning a little bit more into the business side, talking with either business folks or data science stakeholders to figure out how they need data structured. So that's kind of one distinction I've seen between those couple roles. Yeah, we have a few other titles listed here. Again, these are just things you might see if you're browsing, if you're Googling data science jobs come up. So we try just to like organize them, or I think this might be a borrowed slide a little bit, but these are organized into generally how they fit into some of those disciplines. But despite that, obviously there's a ton of overlap. We thought it might be helpful to actually dig into a couple of these roles to try to see, given the title data viz designer or infrastructure engineer, what does that actually mean? And what would someone actually be doing that kind of role? So the next thing we were going to look at is actually a few job descriptions. So again, we realized maybe not everyone on the call is particularly interested in pivoting careers. So if you are, though, maybe you could find this helpful and something that Anahita and I talked about and thought we might be able to talk through and make some use of. So here we have 3 different roles. I just pulled these up on like LinkedIn and looked at the job descriptions there. But it's a data science role at Twitch in a marketing team, a data engineer role at WeWork, and a data analyst role. I actually don't know this company, but it's a cosmetics company in New York. So we try to, a lot of these roles are in tech, so I try to switch it up with at least one of them. But we're just going to quickly walk through some of the points that kind of stuck out to us in some of these job descriptions. So the first thing that, when I pull up a role, or I'm, I guess, helping people decipher some of these, is just try to get like a high level general sense of what you think the role might be about. So for example, on the left, the data science role at Twitch, I noticed a lot of different points. Despite it being called data scientist, there's a lot of bullets or requirements that said, talked about data viz. So in this example, maintaining dashboards and visualizations. So while it's a data science role, I can kind of infer that you'd probably be doing a little bit more of the data visualization work that we mentioned earlier, despite it not being explicitly a data viz title. The data engineer role at Rework, it was kind of made sense. It sounded like a more standard data engineer role, leveraging data expertise to help build and evolve data models. And then the last role, the data analyst role, also I thought kind of fit the title pretty well. Using data to discover business insights, uncover new opportunities, provide recommendations. So you can see that kind of sounds like you'd be working probably with some more either business folks or talking about strategy a little bit more than perhaps the data engineer role you'd be working with engineering and tech. And then one kind of call out is, especially if you're looking at roles at either smaller companies or companies who are a little maybe less mature in their data culture, data ecosystem, just keep an eye out for roles where you maybe quote be doing it all. If you're really excited and want to do like statistical modeling, but your company hasn't done a lot of the, I guess, foundational groundwork to set up, good data infrastructure, you might have to spend some of your time doing that. It's not necessarily a bad thing, but it's something you want to be aware of, and just keep an eye out for. If companies don't know, a ton about data, they might just be throwing a lot into a job description and expecting a lot of you. So I think just helpful to keep that in mind. Cool. So moving on to the next slide. Another thing I think is important, and something that'll tell you a lot about what you'd be doing in your role, is who you'd be working with and who your stakeholders would be. So for instance, in this data science role again at Twitch, it says technical and business team members. You kind of get the sense that you might be working with both engineering teams and the business folks, which could be cool if you're interested in kind of that cross collaboration environment. If we look at the data engineering role again, though, you can see that most of these titles listed of who you'd be working with are really technical or more technical roles. So other data engineers, analysts, data scientists, ML engineers. So you can kind of get the sense again that you'd be doing more, you'd be in the code, you'd be working on pipelines. So that kind of does, again, fit the mold of what we think about when we think about data engineering. And then lastly, the data analyst role. Again, this also fits at least what I kind of think of when I think of data analysts. Working to empower teams with actionable data, automated and intuitive KPI dashboards. That's very, again, like strategy, business metrics, KPI focus, which makes a lot of sense as a data analyst. I don't know how much we talked about it earlier, but I think Anahita has some interesting experience just because she's been in a data science role at Spotify and now her newish role at Netflix. It can kind of speak to stakeholder collaboration.
Sure. When I worked with Matt back in, 2018, at Spotify, I was primarily working very similarly to the stakeholders in this middle role, this data engineer role. While I was a data scientist, it was a very centralized team that I was on, working closely with other data scientists and data engineers, some product managers on metric development and analysis. Fewer people from the business, but now I've been at Netflix for about 2.5 years, and I am surrounded by people without my skill set, which has been an interesting challenge itself. But I have a lot of lawyers on the team, and it's been a very interesting challenge to kind of move from like this gut-driven decision making to a data-driven decision making. It's like a mindset shift. But the challenge for me is, or anyone in a role where it's very business facing, is I think communication is pretty much key. No one wants me to go into detail as to how I did something. Did an analysis. Nobody cares about that. Just tell me the result. That's what they want to know. But also, I guess on the other end, when it's thinking about what are the business needs and how do we turn them into technical requirements is another challenge. But also pulling out those business needs is another challenge. And an example of that, I guess I could share is, a lot of folks might come with me to with a solution to a problem that they want me to run with. And usually we'd want to take a step back and really understand, well, what is the problem at hand? And let's unpack everything and just walk through what kind of collaborate and be a thought partner on what a solution might be. So those are kind of the challenges with working with folks who are non-technical stakeholders, but it's also so rewarding, so much fun. It's been very different from how it was at Spotify for me, but yeah, I'm enjoying it. So yeah, back to you, Matt.
Yeah, it's crazy how much like roles differ from company to company and industry to industry. It's like, I don't know, it's pretty hard to keep a pulse on it all. But yeah, awesome. So this is our second point. Thinking when looking at a job description, who you'd be working with. And then the last one, we kind of talked about it earlier, but it can be pretty important just to look at the tools you'd be using in a job. Again, there's a lot of tools that are doing similar things, like Tableau or Looker. But if you see those listed, you can kind of get a sense of like, all right, I'll probably be doing some dashboarding, some data viz in this role. The interesting takeaway here was that these are honestly like 3 of the first roles we looked at, and they actually all mention Tableau as a skill on their job description. So a lot of companies obviously will just kind of put a wish list and put like a ton of skills and tools, and it might be like overkill. But I thought it was interesting to see that like this one, we kind of bucketed it as like a data viz BI tool, came up in each of these roles, even though they're different titles. So I think again that just kind of like reemphasizes that there's going to be a ton of overlap in some of these roles and titles and what you'd actually be doing in them. Cool. And then the last thing we wanted to speak to, we had the links there if you want to check them out some more. I will say some of those lines were a bit cherry picked, but to get the point across, hopefully it worked. But yeah, so the last thing we wanted to do, we just kind of talk about a few tips. Anahita and I were kind of talking back to some of the things we were thinking about and trying to do earlier in our careers. So if there is anyone on the call who's interested in either transitioning or trying to break into the field, we came up with 3 tips that we think could be helpful as you're potentially doing that. So the first is just to explore the field. So if you're, I guess, pretty new to data analysis or trying to figure out what it's all about, there's some really cool open source resources out there, and I'll actually let Anahita speak to some of those because she has some cool ones that she's come across before.
Sure. I think this is what really inspired me to get into this field. Pudding.cool is this really awesome website. I think Gabby, you and I also bonded over that when we first met. Really amazing data storytelling on there. When I first learned about it, it was Polygraph. And I think that website is still up too, polygraph.cool, I think. I'm sure we can find the links and put them in the chat. But yeah, I think it's a great step to just explore what's out there. There's a lot of stuff on Reddit, a lot of stuff on the Tableau gallery, but within Pudding website, there's some really interesting kind of relatable content. Thanks, Michaela. And one that was really cool that I had found was around like rappers vocabulary. I've already told you I'm kind of obsessed with any kind of analysis when it comes to language, so that really spoke to me back in like 2015. But yeah, I think the first step is really just to explore that field, see what's out there. Twitter is a great resource in just seeing what people are up to too. And yeah, I think the next step is really to dip your toes in and do some kind of practical project. So I spoke a little bit about some of these fun projects that I've done in the past. Another one, since we were talking about rappers, when I was first getting into this field, I actually was self-taught at the beginning. I taught myself Python. And while I was learning it, I wanted to do something super practical. What I did was compare Biggie versus Tupac lyrics, again with the language. But what are the most common words or most unique words for Tupac versus Biggie? What's the sentiment like, and how are they different? Things like that. Silly things that are not super impactful, but were really interesting to me, and I think also set me apart for the job hunt. Matt and I have done some interesting stuff together as well, but I know, Matt, you've done some fun projects on your own too. Maybe you can chat a little bit about that before going into the third tip.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, similar to Anahita, I guess, back when I was first interested, we both share a music passion. So when I was first exploring just to see what data science was all about, to see if I, could see myself doing it every day, I found a project that I was passionate about. I just kind of wanted to see like how music, I guess, genres changed in popularity over time. So I did again, like kind of a self-taught project where I just scraped a bunch of data about, what songs are popular over the years, and kind of plotted out, when was rock most popular? Like I know it was popular in the 70s and 80s, but how did that compare to like jazz? Was jazz on its way out then or earlier? So I guess in general, if you're gonna, try to see if you're interested in a career like this, finding a project that you're really, you personally care about and are, interested in will make it a lot easier to work on, than say just like analyzing something you're not as passionate about or not as interested in. And I'll quickly shout it out just because it was a fun project, and Anahita and I are on the call, but we were interns the same summer back in 2017 at Spotify. It was pretty fun. So we had an intern class of maybe like, actually, I don't remember exactly how big it was. It was like 40 people or so. But Anahita and I did so we used like, we scraped everyone's music listening, which was okay because we were all employees and we got people's permission, just internally, the other interns. So we scraped people's music listening, and we actually clustered everyone based off what kind of music they like. So we formed these like intern bands. So each band was like 5 or 6 people, that all had similar music tastes, and each person was given like a role in the band. Like you were the drummer if you listened to like the fastest paced music, or you were the singer if you listened to the music with the most vocals in it. So it was totally like, just for fun. Anahita and I did it in our spare time, but and obviously we already had started our data science careers, but yeah, just finding something you're interested in and like passionate about, and finding just like a little bit of time to put towards it can really be helpful. Yeah, and that leads into our last point. If you've done a project like that and you're thinking that you could see yourself doing it every day, so getting yourself ready to apply, because we have like a few tips that we kind of jotted down and things we think are important. I don't know if do we want to go through those or not. I don't know how much time we have. 15 minutes.
Yeah, I think we left 10 minutes for questions, and people can keep dropping them in the chat. So if you want to continue a little more, Matt.
Okay.
You're
cool.
welcome.
We can talk a little bit about that. Sweet. Sounds good. So yeah, a couple, I guess, Ani and I came up with. So yeah, going back to step 2, if you do end up doing like some sort of passion project, being able to share that with people who are like potential employers or someone you want to collaborate with will be really important. So yeah, again, this kind of goes back to the role you're in. Like if you're a data engineer, maybe it might be harder, but you can probably find a way to do some sort of like ad hoc data pipeline, I guess. But yeah, so it's starting to, I guess, put together a portfolio or like group your projects together can be pretty important. You probably don't need like a full-blown website per se, but even if it's just like your GitHub or, I think we mentioned it before, but like Tableau is a free version that you can kind of post visualizations really easily. There's a couple ways to do that. But yeah, starting to collect some of those projects together will be important, as you're getting ready to share your work and,
Matt,
I guess, show people what you can work on. Yeah.
could you share a little bit about what GitHub is for those who might not know what it is?
Yeah, for sure. So yeah, if you're working in engineering, GitHub is a tool that's extremely common, I guess, in like tech and coding, where you can basically save versions of your code on GitHub's like website. So it's called version control and can be used a lot more for that in an engineering role. But yeah, if you're doing an analysis, say on your computer, and you're doing some like Python and making some charts and stuff, you can save it on GitHub, and then it's really easy to share with someone. You can just send them the link, and they can check out all your work and the analysis you did. It's really It's really helpful, but just like save your work and also be able to share it. Cool. What else do we have? Oh, so yeah, I guess one tip I have here. So as we mentioned, like you can kind of get a sense of like what a role is going to be about by taking some time to like read through the job description. So something I usually recommend to people is trying to cater your resume to like the role you're applying for. I guess you probably want to do this with any type of role, but if you're a data engineering role, try to highlight the past project you did that had to do a little bit more with data engineering, pipelining, writing efficient, reliable pipelines. If you're going for, say, more of like a data visualization role, there you might want to emphasize either your portfolio a bit more, talk about a past data viz project. So just catering to the actual, I guess, specific type of role you want can be pretty important. When you're going through and applying for some of these positions.
Yeah, I was just going to say one thing. There was a question that I hope didn't get missed. Someone's asking you, Matt, like moving from data engineering to data science and back. And I think I'll just mention this as well about Leah and I, and we'll talk a little bit at the end about data culture and why we started it. But we kind of always look for data people. Like we're not necessarily going to divide up roles and skills because there's so many hats that you wear, and often you're sold a job as a data scientist and then you end up having to write a bunch of pipelines because there's no data engineer, or vice versa. But obviously at Spotify you do have very kind of like strict, that's a very built out data science and data engineering group. So curious, as Katie is, about why and some of your thoughts around that.
Yeah, for sure. I was a data scientist, or like data science by title, for 3 years. I worked on a bit of like a smaller, newer team. So I kind of leaned a little bit more towards like the wearing a few hats kind of spot. So I had the opportunity to work on like data engineering projects as well as more typical data science projects. And so honestly, after a few years, I kind of realized that I just found myself enjoying the pipelining projects a bit more, which I don't know, when I originally started, I was like, I don't know, that sounds boring. I want to do like the cool analysis and talk to business folks and convince them, or show them, or use data to make informed decisions, things like that. Honestly, like a little bit, I think, is I'm like really thrifty of a person, and so like looking at a data pipeline and like figuring out how to make it more efficient, run faster, and like run cheaper is like really exciting to me in a weird way. So I actually find a lot of enjoyment in that. I think lastly, just working with engineers a bit more, I just find myself enjoying like being in the weeds, like figuring out how APIs work, is really exciting for me. That being said, data science is like an awesome path or discipline as well, and I'm still really interested in like all the modeling and things like that. But those are kind of some of the reasons, I guess.
Before we go on to like the other question that's listed, I just wanted to shout out that I know that these suggestions also took into consideration that maybe you have some skill set in some of these tooling or whatnot, but there are also some awesome free resources out there to get up your skill set or just learn something new, whether that's SQL on Codecademy, or I think there are other resources out there that we can probably put together and link out. But who knows, there might be an intro to SQL workshop at some point in the near future within here, Gabby. Maybe?
Yeah, I was gonna say, if you're cool with it, Anahita, I'll hire you. No, and also if people, we'll send a survey after, but we do want to hear from you, like what sessions you want to come next, because I think we're kicking off 2021 with the intro to data careers, but there are so many different directions we can take this and we can go. So SQL is non-negotiable, I think. And then there's also so much around data visualization, BI. But maybe we'll take down, or you can continue, I don't know what the next slides are, and just jump to questions so that we can have a little bit of back and forth now for the last couple minutes.
Cool. And we had one question I want to make sure we get to, just because Matt and Anahita, you've probably both been involved in the hiring process. And so from your perspective, maybe you can speak to a little bit of what you look for and maybe some of the reasons people you have interviewed haven't made it to subsequent rounds for whatever reason.
I think a lot of the roles that we've hired for are just it just gets really competitive. A lot of people apply, and many, it feels like maybe did not read the job description in detail. Some might be overqualified, and that's fine if that's what they want to do. But many might have thought that, given that this is, let's say, an analyst title, it might be data science heavy. But a recent posting from Netflix was not data science heavy, and I had people who are machine learning engineers apply, and I was just a little surprised because it sounds like the role that we have open is more business intelligence heavy, or vice versa. We see some mismatched skill sets there, but I think for me, it's always nice to see some kind of example portfolios. At Netflix in particular, we don't really ask for cover letters, but I guess a way to stand out is always to send a LinkedIn note or something. But usually I'll be more specific to Netflix, even though this is not really a Netflix talk. But at Netflix, culture is also really important. So I think understanding the company culture, understanding the role, and making sure it is truly a good fit for you is definitely important when it comes to this company. But Matt, do you have anything to share about Spotify in particular?
I mean, not a ton, but I guess I'll quickly say, like, the hiring process is like still like a bit of a mystery to me that I've not been able to figure out yet. I think it does have a lot to do with volume. There's just a lot of applicants that come through for not a ton of roles, and there's like a lot of experienced folks as well who come in. And so, like, from the company's perspective, I think that's usually that they just see, like, if you, it's one of those circular things where, like, once you have some experience, you're more eligible, I guess. So that being said, I like, at least at Spotify, I was fortunate enough to like make it as an intern there. So that obviously opened a door for me to like end up in a full-time role. I assume most of the people on this call aren't looking for internships, but a lot of the folks who join new, I mean, it's really their first data role. So usually finding a similar role somewhere else and doing that for a little bit is a way to get your resume looked at a little bit harder in terms of that first step. Yeah, after that, similar to Anahita, just culture fit and being able to make sure that the skills match the role that you're applying for.
Yeah, and I really appreciate you sending. I think one thing like that people, Anahita's dropped in her Gmail. Everybody here, I mentioned this, you'll all be invited to our data culture Slack community. One way that we feel is really helpful, and as both Matt and Anahita are referencing, a lot of these big organizations, there's a volume problem. Leah and I worked at WeWork. We never really figured out the hiring process there either. I think sometimes just having some kind of individual relationship with someone who's in the space can make such a difference, which is why we do sessions like this, which is why they're intimate, which is why there's not 400 people here and you can kind of connect. So please don't hesitate to reach out to us. We really do respond to everything. Anybody that you see here, any names, any emails, and we can hop on calls and see how we can help, because that's really the only way I think the space will get to where it needs to be when it comes to representation of the people that are a part of it. And on that note, in the last couple minutes, just to say a few words, Leah, about for those that aren't familiar with data culture, why we do events like this, and what we do during the day. And after this call, we'll be doing some dashboarding too. So anybody wants to just stay on and do that as well, but I'll pass it to you.
Yeah, so just a little bit about data culture for those of you who might not be familiar, but we are a community and also a consultancy. So there are plenty of ways to be involved with the community by doing events like this and education initiatives. We mentioned Code with Classy. We have a newsletter where we try to connect really talented data people to roles and highlight amazing work that we're doing. So if you just want to be involved in the community, we're so happy to have you here. Thank you for coming, and it's only growing. And in terms of our sort of day jobs, typically what we do is we go into organizations and help them build data capabilities and data culture. So depending on the stage of the organization, maybe you need more data engineering support to stand up your data infrastructure. Maybe you need BI support to make sure the business has the data it needs. maybe you're building out your machine learning capabilities and need some data science or ML engineering. We do all of those things. And while we sort of build technical capabilities, we try to build data culture and try to sort of bring the business in to the process and make sure we haven't set up sort of siloed technical capabilities. So the same ethos that we apply to our community, we want more voices in, we want more representation. We try to sort of spark that in the organizations that we work with. Gabby mentioned we are hiring BI talent in particular, and we also work with a wide network of people that we just love to work with and we think we're amazing. So if you want to do projects together, we are also very open to that. Also, if your company, wherever you work today, needs some more data support, let us know. We would love to be involved in that way. And I'll pass it back to you, Gabby.
Yeah, so please, again, feel free to reach out. I just want to take one more minute to say a huge thank you to Anahita and Matt, who donated their time this evening. These, again, the proceeds are going to Data for Black Lives, which they were very insistent on as well. So we're so grateful. Thank you so much for being here. And again, you are all part of the data culture community now. We're constantly hiring for BI, for data roles. Please do reach out. Yeah, and stay tuned. If you have thoughts on content that you do want to see and hear, you'll be hearing from us. Michaela's going to send a survey, and you can share that, and maybe we'll see that for the month of February. We're going to do these monthly. So thank you all so much. And I'll play myself out.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye. Thanks,
She
everyone.
walked past me like I ain't said a word. Stood there like, man, girl, I don't usually feel some type of way, but this one hit me out in some kind of place. Like when I saw her walking down the street, she looked so fine, I just had to speak. I asked her name, but she turned away as she walked. All that I could say was